Owning a studio wasn't part of some grand plan or hidden desire. It all started with a series of synchronistic events involving the one and only Prince, which led me to lean into my first studio. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the LA quote, conscious, unquote communities and the camera-ready yoga posers. Purple Rain. In 2015, I decided it was time to reclaim control of my life and my living situation by moving back to San Diego. I'd only returned to Los Angeles because of Jack's manipulative ultimatum, but the pull toward the tranquil, authentic lifestyle of North County never left me. Encinitas was calling me back, along with its sense of community, spirituality, authentic yoga, and surf culture. I found what felt like the perfect sanctuary, a stunning gem of a house on Neptune Avenue in Leucadia, overlooking the ocean. Situated right across from Beacon's Beach, it was everything I'd been searching for, a peaceful beachside dream, far removed from the chaos of LA, although I planned to commute to Los Angeles for work half of the week, just as I had done before. The contrast between the serenity of my Leucadia sanctuary and the hustle of LA felt like the perfect balance. I could immerse myself in the calm, authentic vibe of Encinitas, take my dog for long beach walks, and then shift gears when needed, returning to the city's grind for business. I poured my heart into that home, carefully furnishing each room, even custom building several pieces of furniture to create the ultimate beach retreat. The house had a large garage, which I converted into my warehouse and workspace. It was the perfect setup, as I was deep in manufacturing large quantities of clothing, toys, dolls, and books for my growing brands. And then Prince died. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't a die-hard Prince fan. I loved his music, sure, and I had a few of his songs on my iPod, but I wasn't one to follow his every move or know every detail of his life. Yet strangely, on the day he passed, something shifted in my life. I had plans to teach a yoga class to a group of women in my backyard that night, which we followed with wine and cheese on the patio, enjoying the breeze and ocean view. Inspired by Prince's passing, I threw together a Prince playlist for the class that day, dancing around in my living room to Erotic City in preparation. That evening, the women arrived for class as usual. The sky was calm, clear, and starry. A perfect Southern California night. We finished the wonderful yoga session with Purple Rain playing during Shavasana. It felt like the perfect tribute to honor such a remarkable musician and a deeply spiritual man on the day he passed. Afterwards, in the exact moment when the last woman had rolled up her yoga mat and stepped underneath my patio awning, out of nowhere, the sky unleashed a torrential downpour. Not a light sprinkle, but a full-on tropical storm kind of rain. It was so sudden and so intense that we all stood there laughing at the coincidence. It lasted no more than a few minutes, but just long enough for us to joke that Prince had sent us the rain from beyond, before stopping just as abruptly as it had started. We shrugged it off as an amusing, quirky, coincidental moment. But the next day, everything started to change. Suddenly, my life and flow in San Diego just felt off kilter, like I was completely misaligned with the world around me. Doors that were opening now were suddenly closing. It was a noticeable energy shift, as if I no longer fit in this life that I had so carefully crafted for myself. Oh, what's that saying? Man plans and God laughs. That's what it felt like. Around the same time, a massive opportunity appeared on the horizon. Things had really taken off for my children's brand, and I recently secured an in-person meeting with the doll buyers at Target, a huge, beyond epic milestone for my business. Target's headquarters was located in Minneapolis, and the meeting was scheduled for October 14th. And what made this even more significant was that my birthday is on October 13th, a day that has always carried deep spiritual significance for me. It didn't matter where I was, in India, Portugal, or Peru, something profound would always happen. For a decade, it was like clockwork. But that year, I figured things would be different. I was fully focused on my business endeavors. I had a business meeting in Minneapolis. What could possibly happen there? There was so much to prepare before the meeting, and the pressure was on to get everything right. I wasn't focused on or worried about much else. Meanwhile, back in San Diego, my once peaceful life continued to unravel. I had made the well-intentioned but regrettable decision to rent a room downstairs to a man I befriended on the beach. What I didn't realize at the time was that he was a complete sex addict. Whenever I was home, he wouldn't leave me alone, constantly making inappropriate sexual innuendos and coming on to me. The tension in the house grew unbearable, and I found myself feeling distracted in the very space I had lovingly created to be my haven. Now, I'll admit I was attracted to him. That wasn't the issue. The problem was I knew better than to let those feelings lead me. I made it clear to him that if anything romantic or intimate were to happen between us, we'd need to wait at least 6 months. I valued the peace in my home way too much to risk it. But instead of respecting that boundary, he acted out in defiance. Suddenly, he began bringing a revolving door of women into my home, practically flaunting them in front of me. It became a weekly occurrence. Different women, grand displays of affection right there in my living room on my furniture. The space felt invaded, tarnished by these disruptive and disrespectful acts of entitlement. Due to how important my business endeavors were, I couldn't risk a domestic issue. I was forced to make the difficult decision to just let go of my beloved home and, with it, the life I had built in San Diego. I packed up everything, put my belongings in storage, unsure of my next move, but focusing on peace and success. I ended up renting a short-term furnished guest house in Rancho Santa Fe. In September, I decided to take a road trip to Lake Tahoe for my friend Julie's wedding. And of course, I brought my dog Flash along for the adventure. Driving gave me a freedom to take my time, stopping along the way for hikes and soaking in the beauty of nature. But on every hike, a strange phenomenon began, one that I'd never encountered. Purple rainbows arching over the stream or the foliage in front of me. And it wasn't just once or twice, it was 5 or 6 times. And thankfully, I have photos as reminders, but even though I didn't think much of it again at the time, by the 5th one, I started to wonder, what is going on? Was this a sign? On my drive back to San Diego, I stopped in Los Angeles to pick up my mail from my P.O. box there in Santa Monica. I received something that I needed to ship out immediately, so I headed over to the nearby FedEx store on Wilshire Boulevard. While I was standing in line, minding my own business, the female customer in front of me erupted in frustration, shouting at the clerk, "I said Rodeo Drive! Rodeo Drive!" she yelled repeatedly, her voice filled with annoyance as she gave him her address. Her outburst immediately jolted me back to a memory from when I had first moved to LA. I had been working as a nanny for a high-profile couple, Warner Brothers producers who we'll call Mr. and Mrs. K. They had 2 daughters, Nina and Jennifer. And one day, while babysitting them, Mr. K asked me to drop him off in Beverly Hills. It seemed simple enough, but on the way there, he asked me to take Rodeo Drive, believing it to be a faster route. The thing is, I was still fairly new to LA, and in my mind, Rodeo Drive was an area for ridiculously expensive shopping, not a street you actually drove down. So as we approached Rodeo, I didn't slow down, I didn't turn, and Mr. K began to yell at me in the same tone I was now hearing at FedEx. "Rodeo Drive! I said Rodeo Drive!" So the synchronicity of it all hit me, like a ton of bricks. Here I was, standing in the middle of Santa Monica, reliving a moment from 15 years earlier, brought back by the familiar shouts of frustration, and amused by this memory, I pulled out my phone to message Nina, wanting to share the coincidence with her since I was waiting in line. But as soon as I opened my Facebook messages to message her, there it was, a message from Nina from several days earlier. My smile faded as I read her words. "Mr. K passed away. His service is Monday at 12 p.m., which is 2 hours away." I froze. The timing was unbelievable. The same family I was just reminiscing about with a memory so clear and vivid that it felt as though it had happened yesterday. And here I was, standing in a FedEx store mere hours away from his memorial service. Without hesitation, I made a quick plan. I had a dress in the car from the wedding that I had just attended. That would suffice for the service. I rushed through my errand, I changed clothes, and I made it to the memorial just in time, still processing how seamlessly all these moments had come together. After the service, Mr. K's daughters, Nina and Jennifer, came up to me, thanking me over and over again for introducing spirituality into their lives when they were younger. It was such a heartwarming moment, and it made me realize just how much of an impact I had left on them. I hadn't seen them in at least 10 years, and yet they remembered those small but meaningful exchanges from their childhood. As we caught up, Jennifer asked what I was up to and where I was living. I laughed and admitted I didn't know exactly. I was thinking about moving back to Los Angeles, but hadn't figured out my living situation yet. And that's when Jennifer casually dropped a bombshell. You know, my dad owned an apartment complex in Westwood. We have a 2-bedroom unit available if you're interested, she said, completely nonchalant, as if she wasn't offering me the perfect solution to my dilemma. Without missing a beat, I said yes. Just like that, the decision to move back to LA was done. A new chapter was set to begin November 1st. But first, Target. Strangely also, around the same time, I found myself being called back to teach at Maha Yoga, the same studio where I'd worked from 1998 to 2002. It was another full-circle moment, and I began subbing classes there on the days I was in town. The warmth and familiarity of the community was undeniable. Many of the same students and members from 15 years ago were still there, and most of them welcomed me back with open arms, as though no time had passed at all. Also during this time, as I prepared for my trip to Minneapolis, I received an unexpected and fabulous gift. One of my private clients, who worked in the music industry, gave me a ticket to a Prince tribute concert in Minneapolis that just happened to be on my birthday, October 13th, the day before my meeting. It felt like a magical alignment, right in Prince's hometown and on my special day. Woo! Now, I know this might sound a bit crazy, but there had been a growing series of Prince synchronicities that had been subtly weaving into my life the past few months. In small, seemingly random ways, Prince kind of kept showing up, but it wasn't until hindsight that I began to really connect all the dots. As I mentioned, I wasn't even a huge Prince fan to begin with, so I started to pay extra attention. The night before my flight, I decided to get my nails done at a local salon. While I was there, I struck up a conversation with a woman who was sitting across from me named Jessica. She mentioned that her boyfriend's birthday was the following day, the same as mine, so we connected immediately. Naturally, this led me to sharing some of my recent Let's Go Crazy Prince moments, and just as we were talking about it, I kid you not, Purple Rain started playing through the salon speakers. We both stopped in awe, wide-eyed, screaming in delight right there in the salon. We instantly bonded over that magical timing. 15 minutes after she left the salon, she texted me with all caps, OMG, including a video to show me what was playing on her car radio when she drove off. Yep, Erotic City. To this day, she's still saved in my phone as Jessica Purple Rain. When I arrived in Minneapolis, things got even stranger. After landing, I went straight to my hotel, quickly showered and changed for the Prince tribute concert that night in St. Paul at the Xcel Energy Center. And here's where it gets wild. I found myself seated not just anywhere, but 40 feet from the stage with a perfect view. But even more surreal, I was sitting right next to Prince's family, his brother, his sister, and close relatives. I believe this was maybe the birth of my very first selfie with none other than Tika, Prince's sister. The night was already set to be extraordinary. But then, Stevie Wonder, Chaka Khan, Sheila E., The Roots, Erykah Badu, Janelle Monáe, Maxwell, and so many other iconic artists took the stage, performing in what turned out to be a 6-hour ecstatic experience. It wasn't just a concert. It felt like church. An immersion into Prince's world, filled with private clips of him speaking, intimate stories from his closest friends and bandmates, and performances that left me on a euphoric high. And then, this is when I had my what the fuck is going on here moment. The mayor of St. Paul walked onto the stage at the end of the concert holding a large scroll-like document. He took the microphone and declared, October 13th, my birthday, as we know, official Prince Day. As I watched the private clips of Prince and absorbed the energy of the night, I was overwhelmed by the strange synchronicities that had been aligning for months, now culminating in this moment on my birthday. What was happening, I thought to myself. The next day, I had my big meeting with Target. And to my absolute delight, I landed my first order with them. It was a huge milestone, one I'd been working toward for years. I felt like I was walking on air. With more than a few hours to kill before my flight, I decided to take a chance and visit Paisley Park, Prince's iconic estate, before heading to the airport. However, with the concert and the influx of fans in town, the online ticket site showed the tours were completely sold out. I hadn't planned well enough in advance, but how could I have known all of this before it happened? Still, something inside me just wouldn't let it go. After the surreal experience at the tribute concert the night before, even if I couldn't get inside for a tour, I thought at least I could see the outside and soak in the energy of the place. The alternative was sitting in a cold, chaotic airport for hours, and that just didn't feel like the right way to end such a magical trip. So I decided to take my chances. When I arrived at Paisley Park, just as expected, I was turned away at the front entrance. The tours were completely sold out, with a long waiting list of eager fans hoping for a last-minute opening. I stood in the parking lot, feeling a bit disappointed. I'd come so close, yet still missed my chance to experience the magic inside this iconic place. But knowing this could happen, I snapped a photo of the exterior, took a moment to soak in the energy of the space, and began to orient myself to head to the airport. That is, until the universe stepped in, again, in fine fashion and impeccable timing. As I turned towards the road, walking straight towards me was Prince's sister, Tika. Having cheered and danced along together at the concert the night before, she recognized me immediately and greeted me with familiar warmth. She asked what I was doing and why I was leaving. I explained how the tours were sold out, so I was heading to the airport. Without skipping a beat, she smiled and said, "Come with me." Just like that. I was whisked away on a VIP tour of Paisley Park, courtesy of Tika Nelson herself. It was an unbelievable moment that led to an absolutely unbelievable experience, one that truly felt like a divine gift, allowing me to step inside the world Prince had built, filled with music, creativity, spirituality, and impeccable artistry. Upon entering Paisley Park, I walked straight down the entrance hallway, which was lined with Billboard awards, gold records, and photographs of Prince accepting his countless accolades. I was in awe of the sheer magnitude of his legacy surrounding me. The hallway opened up into the atrium, a central lounge space underneath large skylights located in the heart of the first floor. Behind the central lounge was a quiet little kitchen. Curious, I walked over and peered inside, marveling at the thought of Prince spending time here in such an intimate, personal space. And then it happened, the most surreal moment of all. Out of nowhere, cutting through the noise of passing tourists, came the unmistakable and ultimate silencing sound of two doves crying. I'd only just stepped inside moments earlier, so I had no idea just how unusual this moment was, until 6 or 7 staff members, all dressed in purple Paisley Park t-shirts, came rushing into the atrium. One of them, a woman, clearly in awe, announced breathlessly, "The doves, they haven't sang since Prince died." The space fell silent at that moment, leaving only the sound of these sacred birds, which added an almost mystical layer of this already unbelievable experience. It was a scene straight out of a dream. The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I had chills running up and down my body. This wasn't just a routine moment. This was something special and sacred. The doves, named Divinity and Majesty, were perched upstairs just above the atrium. They had been silent since Prince's passing, and here they were, breaking their silence in that exact moment, as if they too were welcoming me into this surreal space. I stood there frozen in awe, realizing that this was more than just a tour. It felt like an ethereal, divine connection. I was hyper-aware, disregarding time in every way, just listening to everything, feeling it all. It was a moment that transcended explanation. If you've read my book, Meaningful Coincidence, you may recall an experience I share about my time in India in 2004, also on my birthday, which parallels what I felt at that moment in Paisley Park. Back then, in 2004, I was overwhelmed by the intensity of synchronistic events and the shock factor of feeling a deep sense of responsibility, fear, confusion, and a desire to run from the perfectly aligned experiences entirely. In India, those emotions had nearly consumed me. But this time, as they resurfaced while standing in the heart of Prince's home, I made a different choice. Instead of retreating or resisting the flood of emotions, I leaned into them. I listened. Rather than letting that fear take over or the inner voice speaking, "Don't think you're special," I embraced it, recognizing that those profound moments were not meant to be escaped, but experienced. Something within me had shifted, and in that moment, I realized how much I had grown since that experience in India. Here, in the place where Prince lived, created, and died, I chose to stand still and open myself to whatever spirit was showing me. As I wandered through the halls of Paisley Park, the weight of everything began to settle in. This wasn't just a museum, it was a journey into the heart of an artist who had poured every ounce of his soul into his craft, leaving behind something far greater than mere songs or performances. It was a space infused with the spirit of this man, who had stood for something beyond fame and fortune. He stood for truth, enlightenment, and the audacity to defy conventions. I was granted access to listen to the very last track he had been recording before he passed. The music was alive, even unfinished. In his private meditation room, which he called the Galaxy Room, I sat in stillness, meditating, feeling the energy it cultivated in that space. It was peaceful, yet electric and pulsing with funk. I danced under the spinning mandalas in his performance hall, feeling the pulse of the space as if it were still alive with his presence. I even had the chance to sit at his desk, his actual desk. It was such a grounding moment, a reminder that this icon, this untouchable figure, was also just a man with dreams and battles and paperwork. There were, of course, the tourist areas filled with memorabilia and presentations, but the most profound moments when I was allowed to simply be in the spaces he had inhabited, spaces that felt sacred, not because of their physical contents, but because of the energy they held. What struck me the most was the palpable sense of purpose that lingered in the air. Again, Prince wasn't just an artist, he was a warrior of truth. A man who stood up to the injustices of the world, called himself a slave to his recording label, and spoke out in the name of something far greater than fame. He fought for creative freedom, for enlightenment, and he was aligned with I am consciousness, as am I. So much of this book is calling out exactly what Prince fought against. He didn't just make music. He stood as a fierce advocate for integrity and authenticity in an industry that often chews people up and spits them out if they refuse to submit and conform. He called out the hypocrisy, the exploitation, and the hollow promises that lure people in only to rob them of their essence. I see now that everything I'd been feeling, everything I'd been fighting for is part of the same battle, to push back against a suppressive system that values profit over soul and image over substance. In that moment, I finally allowed myself to fully align with what had felt like a woo-woo, hippy-dippy, exaggerated coincidence, however anyone wants to explain it, whether as synchronicity, divine timing, cosmic resonance, harmonic convergence, or something else entirely. I no longer care. What I do know is this: it was an undeniable force, and my mind has a sharp, almost instinctive way of solving riddles, seeing through people's lies and piercing together spiritual patterns and synchronicities. It's like a combination byproduct of being both hypervigilant from my upbringing and trained as a yogi committed to peeling away illusions to embrace reality most truthfully. This combination gives me a clarity to see both deceptions and alignments that others might miss, allowing me to navigate life with a sharper lens, one that looks beyond surface-level realities. As Nietzsche so perfectly put it, those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. For those of us who live authentically and refuse to conform to society's narrow expectations, we may seem insane to those brainwashed by the world. But we are the ones fearlessly dancing to the true pulse of life. This is what I've been called to do, and this is what I will always lean into. The only other person I've met with the same refined hyper-vigilant abilities that I possess is my father, Al. Growing up, I believed his exceptional and fearless ability to read people came from the hypervigilance he developed during his time serving in the Army while in the Vietnam War. He was never treated for his PTSD. Those were different times. But as I got older and began experiencing similar traits myself, I started to realize that his perceptiveness wasn't solely a byproduct of the war. It was part of who he was, something deeper, energetic and genetic as well as developmental. Even as a child, I connected with him on a level I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. I empathized with his pain and frustration, and I was mostly patient with his temper and moments of isolation when he felt misunderstood. It wasn't that I understood what he was going through intellectually, but I felt it. I must have related to him on a spiritual and emotional level, long before I could consciously grasp the complexities of the situation. When I returned to California, the synchronicities surprisingly continued to unfold. Just 2 weeks later, I made the big move from San Diego into the Westwood apartment exactly as planned. The process was utterly exhausting, and within a few days of settling in, I was off to lead a 3-day detox retreat for 42 people in Desert Hot Springs. That experience, while rewarding, left me doubly drained. So by the time Monday rolled around, I was beyond ready to take a few days off, desperate to restore my energy, fully unpack, and mentally regroup. I had a massive task ahead of me, fulfilling my first target order. The excitement was there, but I knew I needed to regain my strength to rise to the occasion. I literally said out loud, "You are not going anywhere today." Then, at 9:20 a.m., just as I was finishing my morning coffee, my phone buzzed from a text from Elise, a fellow yoga teacher. She was in a bind and asked me to sub her class at Equinox in Santa Monica at 10:45 a.m. I hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Sorry, no can do today." But she again asked, hitting me with a plea that tugged at my heart. Her dog was having a health emergency and she needed to take him to the vet. That got me. As a dog owner myself, I completely understood the panic and helplessness that comes with those situations. So, despite my desperate need for rest, I sighed and texted back, "Okay, I'll cover it." I figured I could push my day off to tomorrow instead. It was just going to be one class, right? When I arrived at the studio, I decided to play my April Prince playlist. It had been a long time since I played that particular set, since the night Prince passed away, actually. The energy in the yoga room was great, and there was a strong group ready for class. But then, something strange and completely unexpected happened. As Purple Rain began to play over the speakers, a young blonde woman practicing on a purple mat right in front of me caught my attention. She sat down on her heels towards the back of her mat, gesturing for me to come over to her. I walked towards her, and with an almost concerned look on her face, she pointed to the sweat imprint on her mat. And there it was, a perfect heart-shaped imprint right in the center of her mat. "Aw, how cute," I thought. But then she looked up at me with wide eyes and asked, "What does it mean?" as if I had any insight. I crouched down next to her, still teaching the rest of the class. And I paused for a moment, not wanting to project anything on her experience, and I said, only the person viewing a sign can truly decipher its meaning. But I've heard that purple rain symbolizes new beginnings, so maybe there's something exciting on the horizon for you in love." Her eyes lit up at my answer, smiling, clearly satisfied with the interpretation. So she returned to her mat and slipped seamlessly back into the flow of practice as the song continued to wrap its magic around the room. I decided to capture the heart-shaped sweat imprint for her, so I made my way to the stereo cabinet to grab my phone. As I turned around, ready to take the photo, something even stranger happened. I honestly thought I was getting punked. A man in the far back row and right far corner, George, a regular who I knew well, jumped off of his mat like he was playing hot potato. His eyes were wide, his hands covering his mouth, and he let out a high-pitched squeal. George was never like this. At first, I was convinced that he was mocking the woman's moment, but something about his expression was too genuine. He frantically called me over, waving me toward his mat. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Was everyone playing some kind of joke on me? What the hell was happening? George pointed at his mat with one hand, the other hand still over his mouth. "It's Prince!" he yelled. His sweat imprint sat just above the yoga mat's surface. It hadn't fully absorbed into the mat, and it was unmistakable. It was Prince himself holding his hands in a heart shape. The boots, the pompadour hair, the signature bell sleeves, it was all there. I was stunned, frozen in disbelief, staring at what felt like an impossible image. George, equally shocked, reached out and rubbed his hand over the sweat mark. But it didn't move. It didn't change shape. The mark stayed perfectly intact. I had no choice but to stop the class. This was too surreal not to acknowledge. "Okay, everyone," I announced. "Let's come into pigeon pose. I'm going to give a lesson on synchronicity today because I have been experiencing a wild ride with some Prince synchronicity lately, and you are now all witnesses to this today." While they settled into the stretch, I told the class about what had been swirling around in my life in the past few months. The Prince moments, the concerts, sitting next to his family, the unexpected declaration of official Prince Day on my birthday, the doves singing in Paisley Park, and now this. Prince literally appearing in George's sweat right here in the middle of a yoga class. I could see the class leaning in, curious but also reflective. We live in a world where we're constantly moving, but if we're always in motion, we miss the small things, the details, the moments that are trying to speak to us. Life has a way of nudging us, whether through synchronicities, signs, or just a quiet moment of clarity. The energy in the room shifted, and I could feel that everyone was beginning to internalize the message. Pay attention to the little things, the coincidences that don't feel like coincidences, I said. These moments are guiding us, if only we can slow down enough to hear what they're saying. For the rest of the class, there was a collective sense of peace and presence. A reminder, again, that magic does indeed exist and that it's more natural than we're led to believe. This was no accident, and it also felt incredibly refreshing to have solid witnesses to what was happening in my life. No one would have believed me otherwise. After class, George was still sitting there, staring at his yoga mat in awe. "I don't want to roll it up," he said, quietly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked up at me, dead serious. "Prince is trying to talk to you." I laughed nervously, though I knew he wasn't joking. "I know," I said, "but what? What is he trying to say?" George was one of the most intuitive, spiritual people I knew, highly tuned in, compassionate gay man. If anyone were to deliver a message from Prince, it would probably be him. So he thought for a moment, and then he finally said, "I think you were lovers in a past life." I shook my head unconvinced. That answer didn't resonate with me. It felt too easy, too predictable. People love to default to the idea of past life romances when faced with the unknown, but this felt deeper. It felt more spiritual, more pure, more present. It wasn't about romance. It was about something bigger, something universal. I just didn't know what it was yet. "It's more than that," I told him. "I feel like it's about purpose, alignment, something beyond just a personal connection." George nodded, still staring at the mat, and I could tell he understood what I meant. I glanced down at my hands, and they were trembling. My heart was racing. I could barely process what had just happened. George's words echoed in my mind. "Prince is trying to talk to you." But what could all this mean? By the time I was heading out the door from Equinox, it was 12:15 p.m., and I was still buzzing from the surreal events of the morning. I glanced down at my phone as it had started ringing. It was Maha Yoga. I answered the call. "Hi, Alanna, it's Anna. We've had an emergency, and Jenny can't teach her 12:45 class today. Is there any chance, please, that you could cover this class in 30 minutes? I let out a laugh, shaking my head. It was clear that there was no such thing as a day off for me today. I was only 20 minutes away from Maha, so it wasn't a huge inconvenience, but I was still drunk on what had just happened. My mind was racing, trying to process George's words, the Prince figure in the sweat, everything. But there wasn't time to sit and reflect. It seemed the prince had more plans for me today. Sure, I said, I'm on my way. Anna sounded elated and grateful, so with a mix of curiosity and anticipation, I headed over to Maha Yoga. As soon as I entered the yoga room, something immediately caught my eye, a striking purple amethyst crystal ball sitting right in the center of the teacher's platform. It shimmered through the studio window light, fully claiming its presence. I'd never seen this there before, but what puzzled me the most was that nobody seemed to know who it belonged to. And trust me, I asked everyone in the studio, and no one could give me an answer. Teaching that class, I was admittedly distracted. The events of the morning were still swirling in my mind. Naturally, I played the same Prince playlist that I had used earlier. It felt like the fitting thing to do. Once again, as the familiar notes of Purple Rain filled the space, I guided the class into Shavasana, the final resting pose. I took the opportunity to meditate myself. I walked over to the crystal ball, I sat down, and I gently held it in my hands, feeling its cool surface grounding me. I closed my eyes, heart and mind open, and I silently invited whatever message might be trying to come through. This room, Maha Yoga, wasn't just any room. It held deep significance for many people and for me personally. It was where I started teaching yoga back in 1999. Yes, that's 1999. Those early years were so pure, I even called my classes Pure Yoga. A room filled with light, memories, alignments, and beginnings. And then, just as I surrendered to the stillness, I heard it, clear and unmistakable, as it whispered directly into my soul, "You're home. You're home. You're home." The words just echoed softly but powerfully over and over again, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of peace and clarity. It was as if I was being reminded that despite all the twists, turns, and trials, this was exactly where I was meant to be. I was home.